back. We're back. We're going to pick up from the trachea and make our way down into the lungs. So once the trachea gets to the top of the lungs, it starts branching off, and it branches off into what we call bronchi. It will branch off initially into two primary bronchi, and they're pretty large. Primary bronchi branch into smaller branches called secondary bronchi. Secondary bronchi then branch off into tertiary bronchi, and these just keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, there's a left primary bronchus and a right primary bronchus. Left one goes to the left lung, right one goes to the right lung. But then within each lung, there are secondary bronchi which go into each lobe. So each lobe of the lung gets its own secondary bronchi. And then those secondary bronchi start branching off into smaller and smaller sections of the lung. As these go further and further into the lung, cartilage decreases, smooth muscle increases. So we'll talk about asthma later on in this chapter, and the reason that people have asthma is because something triggers these smooth muscles to contract, and at that point they can't get oxygen from the outside into their lungs and carbon dioxide from their lungs to the outside. Now, when you get all the way down into your lungs, the smallest little tubes are called bronchioles, and at this point there's no cartilage there. They're only about 1 millimeter in diameter, and those end in what we call alveoli. And I always think of alveoli as like a bunch of grapes. And I'll show you that picture in a minute. Again, lots of smooth muscle. Sympathetic nervous system causes those to dilate. Parasympathetic causes those to constrict. And when those constrict too much, as I mentioned, that's when you get asthma. So here is the trachea, primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi. Notice that the cartilage is getting less and less and less. Here's those tiny little tubes called bronchioles, no cartilage. And then here are little bunches of grapes called alveoli. This is where in the alveoli is where gas exchange actually occurs. And we've got alveolar ducts that lead into individual alveolar sacs. And inside of alveolar sacs, there are clusters of those grapes that are like alveoli. And it's what makes lungs look kind of spongy. If we get back to school, I will make sure and get a set of lungs for you from the butcher like I usually do. They're pretty fun to look at, and they're kind of smushy. And the weird thing is there's like 150 million of these per lung. So there are a lot of them, and they're kind of cool to look at. This is what they look like up close. Each individual one of these is an alveolus, and you'll see that they're covered in capillaries. Well, sure, because this is where we want to get oxygen from the alveoli into the bloodstream, get carbon dioxide from the bloodstream back into the alveoli, so then we can exhale this. Okay. And this is what alveoli look like under the microscope. Pretty cool picture. And you don't need that. Skip all of that. All right. The last part of the anatomy is the lungs. And your lungs have 5 lobes to them. There's 3 on the right side. There's only 2 on the left side. Why would that be? Right. The 3 on the right side, 2 on the left, because the heart sits a little bit to the left. And so there isn't enough space for 3 lobes on the right. Up underneath your first rib is called the apex, and what rests on the diaphragm is called the base. And they are covered with a visceral pleura membrane, so they're very, very slippery. Like I say, they're pretty cool to touch. They are in your pleural cavities. Remember, we talked about body cavities way back at the beginning of the year, and that pleural cavity is then lined with a parietal pleura serous membrane. So those lungs are going to slide around in that pleural cavity. Here's what they look like. The lobes do actually have names. You don't need to know the names. I just need you to know that on the right lung there's 3, left lung there are 2. Okay, and you can see where the heart is in relation to these lungs. Okay, that is the end of the anatomy. So that's where we will stop, and we'll pick up with physiology later.